Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you enjoy the show.
You meet someone online and there's this instant connection. It's amazing how much the two of you just seem to click. They live somewhere far away and there's some plausible reason they can't travel to meet you. They tell you they're in love with you, and you feel optimistic for the first time in a long time. They have a successful career, yet somehow they need money from you to solve a short-term problem, always with the promise of paying you back. Time goes on and they need more money more urgently. You've started to see the cracks and begin to wonder whether they've been lying this whole time. All of a sudden it hits you. You've been scammed. Fool Me Twice is the story of my mother, Jules Hannaford, a woman who was drawn into the dangerous world of sweetheart scams. After a trip overseas to meet a stranger, a dangerous altercation in a Manchester hotel room, and thousands of pounds lost for good, she's here to tell her story. Fool Me Twice, a true crime podcast, will be available on all podcast platforms in late 2019.
A warning to our listeners, some of the topics discussed in this podcast may be disturbing. If you need support, please contact your local crisis line or helpline. And if you're in Hong Kong and you'd like to call the Samaritans hotline, you can call them on 2896 0000. Today I'm here with Vishal Nanda. Hi Vishal,
Hello.
Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
It's so exciting to have you here. And for the listeners out there, Vishal was one of my students,
Oh, yeah.
10 years ago?
18 years ago. I know.
Oh,
See, I'm
no,
old.
I'm so old. 18 years
We're both
ago.
old.
That's shocking.
I
Oh, my
know.
God, that's terrible. I've only been in this school 19 years.
Oh,
So
yeah, you
anyway-
just joined.
Yeah, 19 years ago. Vishal, tell me a bit about your childhood. Where were you born and what was your early childhood like?
I was born in Hong Kong, second generation as well. So my dad was born here as well. So I grew up very much in Hong Kong. My Cantonese, however, is non-existent, which is quite shameful.
Yes, that's
But
shocking.
It's terrible. And it's coming from an international school background. I find a lot of people are kind of in that boat where you grew up in Hong Kong, but you have that international school background. So you're a local, but it's a different kind of local for a lot of it. Went to school here.
Were you happy as a kid?
Not really. I'm going to be
okay.
honest. Yeah,
Yeah, no,
I'm
that's
gonna
good.
start being honest. I actually find it sometimes difficult to remember because it's probably the way the mind works. It clouds it with more. I don't want to use the word trauma because sometimes I feel like we're about more traumatic memories than happy memories. They seem to stand out more, unfortunately. I mean, I don't think you can just be unhappy the entire time, but as I'll probably tell you, I was undiagnosed with a mental illness
Yes.
when I was younger. That was probably a big part as a teenager here that made my experiences not so positive.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I'm trying to get at is when did the change start, or when did you notice that you weren't very happy, or when did these mental health issues begin? I'm trying to work out if they happened
You
at
started
puberty.
it.
Yeah, it's my fault.
It was you. No.
Sorry about that. Like as a primary school kid, were you sad or were you unhappy, or do you not remember?
I think I was happier as a primary school kid. And from what I've read and from what I've said from talking to doctors, they say something like what I have, which is bipolar, manifests later on in your teens and then your later teens. And I was being kind of facetious by saying it was you that did it. But actually, there's a bit of truth to that because you were the first teacher that noticed something was wrong. And a big thing, I think, when it comes to mental illness is you don't know there's anything wrong. Like, you just think you're that way. And
so you think everybody kind of feels low and is not coping.
Everyone's just terrified of school. Like, everyone hates themselves. I mean, life's just like that.
Right. So then when I was like, Vishal, talk to me, what's going on?
You were basically like, you're not meant to be this scared all the time. And it was a revelation.
Was that like an awakening for you that something wasn't quite right for
Definitely
the first time?
The first step. Definitely. Yeah.
How did you feel at that stage in your life as a teenager? What was going on?
I would be anxious every single day. I would be just terrified. I'd be terrified of what people thought of me. I mean, some of these are teenage issues, but they'd be running through my mind. I was terrified of anyone saying anything to me, a teacher saying anything to me, terrified of making mistakes, terrified of people looking at me at times. Like, I was scared. I was constantly what we now call anxious or anxiety. I think back then the vocabulary that we now use for a lot of mental illness has come a long way. So the vocabulary didn't really exist. I mean, I'm saying scared, but the symptoms were what we now call anxiety. And I was unhappy. I did the bare minimum amount of work. And one of the labels that gets foisted on, I think, people who have chronic depression, which was very similar symptoms for me, is laziness or lack of motivation, because that's really what depression is. It's not unhappiness. It's a lack. It's like gray. I was, in quotation marks, a lazy kid. I barely did the work. I tended to hand in everything late. I was good in class, but when I'm on my own, I had nothing. I had no motivation to do anything, except when it was creative. I love doing all the creative stuff. You were my drama teacher, actually. I love drama.
Yeah, you were great at drama. And it's interesting, I think, that we should point out that you were very bright. Like, we do cognitive ability tests on kids so that we can gather data on them. So it tells us sort of what they're capable of intellectually. Now, of course, it's not always the way to measure a kid's success. But from your CATS test, we could tell that you were very smart. And so you were underachieving at school as well.
Yeah, exactly. But you see, that's the thing, because I could get away with looking good at school. This actually happened to me all the way to university. I came out of university with a 2.1, barely attending my classes. It almost masks it because you're functional, like on a level. So everyone's like, oh, you see, it's fine. It can't be that bad.
You also had a really good sense of humor. So you were quite funny. Did you mask your insecurities with humor? And that's a common coping mechanism, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. Like, it was a bit of coping mechanism. It was a bit of, I think, being witty is a way to be popular. It's a way to turn intelligence into something that has like social credit, if that makes sense. And I definitely had a sort of dark, sardonic sense of humor. And I think performance in general masks it because you put on an act.
And this is why a lot of actors actually come out as having mental health issues, like Catherine Zeta-Jones, who has told us she's bipolar, and Robin Williams. And taking on that persona and that character can make you step away from yourself.
Yes, exactly. Carrie Ann Fisher, played Princess Leia in Star Wars, was bipolar. She recently, she was very explicit about it. I'd say one of my heroines, because she was very good at being upfront about it. A lot of musicians, I think performers in general, comedians, it's the element of performance and kind of unleashing yourself on stage, because I still do a bit of that with spoken word poetry and a little bit of comedy. And it is very freeing to just kind of like go all out when you can't do that normally.
Exactly. Yeah. It's interesting that you're still doing that kind of thing as well. Exactly. And your writing and your creativity.
Exactly. I can't help it. Like, it's definitely wired into me, the bipolar in that sense. It makes you want to do stuff, want to make stuff. You have odd thoughts, as it were.
It's really interesting because I just discovered recently that you were diagnosed as bipolar. And when you were at school, you were diagnosed with anxiety and depression. Is that right?
Unipolar depression.
You went off to see somebody. But it's interesting because a trait of being bipolar is manic behavior, isn't it? And if I look back now, I can see that mania in you as a kid, but I wasn't skilled enough to recognize what it was. Like, if I had you now as a student, I would recognize that as more likely being bipolar.
I mean, that's fantastic that we've gotten to that point, because I think teachers and parents, you're like the first line of being able to notice this in a kid, right? At that age. The vocabulary didn't really exist back then, or the mechanisms. I remember I used to know a lot more statistics about this, but many, many people with bipolar get misdiagnosed as depressed. It's difficult at times to diagnose. And there's several different types of bipolar, but one of the two distinctions is bipolar type 1, bipolar type 2. Bipolar type 1 is characterized by, I'd say about, and I might get a few statistics here wrong, so you might need to edit this.
No, we won't edit. We'll just apologize.
This is just ignorance. But it's something like 50% is mania, which can involve things like going on spending sprees, having an enlarged sense of who you are, making decisions that are entirely out of character and detrimental to your life, your wallet, being hypersexual, and then followed by depression. And then there's bipolar type 2, which has something called hypomania, which is like, it's not as extreme in the sense of like you kind of completely flip personalities. but there's a lot more depression mixed into it. And that's the diagnosis I have as type 2. So that can be even harder to diagnose because you don't have the kind of manic blowout where, you can end up hospitalized and you can have done something that really puts a warning sign on what just happened.
So it's a little bit more subtle, the type 2.
The other thing to keep in mind is our understanding of bipolar, although it's improved, is really far from our understanding of depression.
Tell me the difference. What's the difference between depression and bipolar?
Bipolar, all the different classifications of bipolar are based on symptoms shown. So there's something called rapid cycling, which is to do with if you have 2 to 3 mood swings, I think, in a week or a month or something like that. But the point is they're kind of arbitrary, like the lines that are drawn. Bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 aren't actually completely different things, and the treatments are very similar. So our understanding is kind of blurred because there's a productivity to being manic or hypomanic, right? It's like what we're talking about. You can be creative. You can certainly some of the greater thinkers. I ain't one of them, but some of those guys,
yeah,
they did some stuff. The bipolar helped with that. Whereas unipolar depression, it's a lack of energy, which I've had definitely, sort of a pessimistic outlook. It's complete lack of motivation to do anything.
I remember talking to you as a teenager still, and you saying how you felt like you had a dark cloud over you and that everything was very negative and heavy, and it was like moving through mud.
Yeah, exactly. That is still how it feels. The bipolar element of the depression is when I can be speeding in my head. So I can be thinking 100 miles an hour, but they're all negative thoughts. And I'm almost paralyzed to do anything at the time. So I'm hypo-miserable, if that makes sense, hyper-miserable. If you were super caffeinated, but you just saw sad movies, or something, I don't know.
It's like a combination of caffeine overdosing.
Exactly. And just misery and just unhappy. Everything is terrible. But there's also the complete lack of motivation. I think we take for granted our basic motivations to do things. Getting up in the morning, we don't really question that if you're not depressed, though we all have our ups and downs. Because you just get up in the morning, you got to go eat, you're hungry, you got to go to work. But with depression, it can take away those motives. It can get to the point where nothing has that purpose or point to it. And you stop taking care of yourself and you stop doing these basic things. And eventually, to be completely honest, you might even stop seeing the point of being alive. And suicide is a very difficult topic to talk about. I've had some experiences with it myself. Well, not completely because I'm here.
But you have had suicidal thoughts?
Yeah, that's what kind of got me to the point that I was diagnosed. I hit kind of my own little rock bottom and I was very suicidal. And then I got myself to a doctor. And that's when they realized it wasn't just depression. It blew my mind when they told me this. I was literally just give me some pills. I'm going to do something. And the guy's like, yeah, okay, I'll give you these pills. This is a mood stabilizer, not a tranquilizer. And I was like, just give me some antidepressants. You can't actually give antidepressants to someone who's bipolar. It's the treatment is completely different. If you give someone who's bipolar most antidepressants, it flips them to mania. That's the problem with treating it, because if you speed someone up who has bipolar, they get manic. But you kind of need to be overly simplistic, do that to someone who has unipolar depression. You got to give them a dopamine boost or a serotonin boost.
Right.
And that was the stuff I was taking before I was diagnosed.
Right. As a teenager, you were put on antidepressants?
Exactly,
Was it
yes.
while you were at school?
It was while I was at school. It didn't work.
Right.
It didn't do anything for me at the time. And
did it make things worse, looking back?
I can't remember. I got to be honest.
Okay.
I can't remember. And I was anorexic for a while. I stopped eating or I didn't take care of myself.
I remember that, yeah.
Which was surreal because I thought I was fat.
Were you diagnosed with anorexia?
I was, yeah. I was diagnosed by a psychiatrist. And
was
saw
that
nutrition.
after school or while you were still at school?
Well, I was still at school.
Oh, I don't remember that. Did I know that?
I think so. You've probably had a lot of students.
Yeah.
I'm amazed you remember anything.
I have. You were diagnosed with anorexia, depression, and anxiety at high school.
I believe so. It was definitely depression, and I was diagnosed with anorexia.
Right, okay.
Both of that. Anxiety, I never heard the word when I was in high school, so I don't think so.
Oh, right, okay. So that wasn't a part of it. I remember that I called your parents to tell them I was worried about you. How did that go down in the family, and what sort of reaction did they have in the beginning? Do you remember?
I remember a lot of experiences with them, and I have to be honest, now after, now that I'm 31 years old, I really think they did their best with something that's quite difficult. Because I think one of the things that's difficult for a parent, I'm not one of my, well, as far as I know, being able to help at a certain point. They could never get inside my head and fix what's in my head. All they could do is support me. They couldn't change the way I felt. They couldn't change the way I behaved. And that could be really tough, I can imagine. They just want to get me the help that I want. And it was difficult for them to understand. We're very different people, my parents and I. They come from a business-oriented, career-oriented background, whereas I'm pretty creative. It was always something that we didn't quite see life in the same way, if that makes sense. It was difficult. They didn't quite understand.
And I think that's so interesting because so many parents can be like that where they want to fix things, but they can't necessarily fix. And they've got to seek out the right support. And that's where schools and parents need to work together to get kids the right support. And unfortunately, we didn't quite get you in the right lane at that time, but we still got you somehow. And it was moving in the right direction, wasn't it?
Exactly. I mean, the resources we have now are incredible. My mom and dad, they've educated themselves on bipolar with Google and with like Mayo Clinic and with Mind HK and all these great society. Back then, they like, what are you going to do? You're going to have to talk to a professional and hope they can explain stuff well.
Yeah, did we have Google the best when you were at school?
We did. We had Alta Vista as well and Yahoo. But
okay, cool.
Oh man, Alta Vista.
But we didn't
there
use
still
it.
weren't that resources. Like they just weren't that. Like the roadway was there, the places didn't exist to go to.
Exactly. Then what happened? You left school. How did you overcome the anorexia, first of all?
This is where the help made a difference because, first of all, I think one of the biggest things that happened is recognizing there's a problem because otherwise there doesn't seem to be anything wrong. And so once I was told I was anorexic, which blew my mind, I had a warped body, what they'd probably call body dysmorphia nowadays. I just a warped image. I just thought I was fat. And then being told it was a problem because there's the element of here's the label for it. And there's an element of this isn't good. Like, we can change this. You're not meant to feel this way. Life isn't meant to be this hard. Like, if you don't eat, things are going to happen to you. Here's a blood test. I mean, we did blood tests, and I remember very clearly the doctor saying that you have the nutrition level of a prisoner, which always makes me wonder how badly we treat prisoners. But that hit home when it's on paper in black and white. And it makes you want to do something about it. And I forced myself to eat, basically. It took years and years and years, to be honest, till I kind of made the habit. And I will still, up until really recently, have days where almost to punish myself as a form of punishment or as a form of unhappiness, I won't eat. And you lose your appetite when you're depressed. In fact, it still happens to some degree. I'm just not anorexic. It's still there. And that's the thing about, I'm not cured.
And that's the thing about mental health issues, whether it be depression, anxiety, bipolar, anorexia. Many, many people have to deal with it for the rest of their lives. And you've got to learn the best coping strategies and the best medication or the best treatment or whatever it is that works for you. And that can take a while. You've got to try different people, different things, different methods.
There are certain illnesses like mood disorders, bipolar falls under that, or schizophrenia, where like it is a lifelong thing and it's always going to have its challenges. I think there probably are some people who are medicated enough where they've dealt with it very, very, very well. But for the most part, there's a lot of maintenance involved. There's a lot of doing stuff outside of medication that you kind of have to do. I think they say that a large population will have a depressive episode at some point in their life. I think something like a third of people have a major depressive episode, which is about a week to 2 weeks or more in their lives at some point. But those can be, at least they're temporary in the sense that you deal with them. It's like having a bad accident. You fix them. You do the best that you can. And there's definitely a distinction between that and kind of dealing with something over time. I think there's more in common with people that have chronic illnesses and people who have mental illnesses that are chronic as well. Like, I shouldn't speak towards what it's like to be in any way. I don't even know the politically correct term anymore. Handicapped or enabled?
Physically challenged.
Physically challenged, right. Or have chronic pain or anything like that. But I bet it's a similar struggle in terms of certain things, like the frustration or the challenge of doing the best that you can with what you've got. That makes sense?
Absolutely. And we must point out that some people are able to overcome these things completely. You know, they can, whether it be chronic illness or mental health issues. But it's many people that have to manage and live with it for, you know, the rest of their lives as well.
Some a lot better than others. I consider myself to be incredibly lucky. Yeah, it took a while for me to get treatment, but the treatment I'm on pretty much works.
Right.
I can hold down a job. I can function. I'm not terrible with my girlfriend. I have a girlfriend for one thing. I can have relationships.
She's lovely.
And she's wonderful and deluded and terrible taste in men. And I have friends who are bipolar and one who's schizoaffective, and they can't hold down a job. They are barely functional. And they're constantly struggling with side effects of medication or getting the wrong diagnosis or not being able to get the help they need. Because in Hong Kong, the help is not easy to find. Good help is not easy.
It's really true that it's not only hard to find, but it's super expensive.
Oh, God, it's really expensive. Yeah.
And most insurances don't cover things for mental health, which is really, really sad.
Yeah, it really is, actually.
Tell me, when you got to university, you'd left home, you didn't have a teacher like me chasing you around the school, your parents weren't there.
No.
What happened to your mental health at university?
It definitely got worse. because I was just left to my own devices. So I drank a lot. And it wasn't...
As many people do when they first get to uni.
I drank a lot on my own.
See, now that's a sign something's not quite right.
Yeah, I feel like you have SoCo, you're in there in the bench, and you're just knocking it back. Maybe you should go to a party instead. Like, bring someone with you. I didn't even really know what I wanted, so I did English literature because I was good at it. But back at the time, I now realized I had no ambition. I had no drive. I had nothing I wanted. I was just going through the motions as best as I can. And it was very similar at university. I attended the bare minimum of classes, literally. And I did well anytime there was speaking involved. There were seminars, I did well. Essays, I do at the last minute. And I was miserable. Like, I just waste a lot of time being unhappy or being depressed, not being able to get up, not being able to go to a lecture, not seeing the point in doing any of those things either. And then I'd have these sort of bursts of like, maybe it was hypomania, like inspiration, where I'd suddenly want to travel all over the country, or I'd write a little bit for a while, or I joined every community and then went there like twice, like just loving everything for a little while.
And then you'd slip back into the depression.
And you crashed. I'd crash all the time.
You got your uni degrees though, despite this.
Exactly. I was so sure that I was going to fail. I remember my last few months when we were waiting for our grades, and I was just convinced. I was like, I've done the math in my head and I'm finally going to fail. And I had this sense of relief because I was like, maybe now something will happen. Like if I fail, I don't know. I was convinced it would be a sign. Like, look, I'm actually messed up, because my measure of how bad things are wasn't how I felt. It was how much can I do life? How much can I cope? How much can I succeed in inverted commas? And I ended up with a 2-1. Which was good, but at the same time was oddly frustrating because I was still like, when is the other shoe going to drop? Like, I shouldn't have this degree. To this day, regret not going to all those freaking lectures. Like, I'd go now. They're freaking amazing. But at the time, I'm like, now I realize I couldn't. At the time, it was more like, I won't, or I don't want to. Now I realize I just couldn't.
Did you beat yourself up at the time?
All the time.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a running thing. That since I was a teenager, I beat myself up about everything. Everything was my fault. I had certain teachers that meant well and would always say things like, you have so much potential, which is a nice sounding thing to say, but it's another way of saying you're not achieving, if you see what I mean.
You're not as good as you could be.
Exactly. Which is just basically you're not as good. You're never going to be as good if you keep getting, say, B's or A's, but they're like, get an A-star. It's an odd form of pressure, if that makes sense. So it has to be me. It always has. You're the variable all the time. It has. And I think a lot of people think that as well, because that's one of the problems with mental illness is it's invisible. A lot makes much more sense for a parent, a teacher, or even a friend to be like, shape up. What are you doing? You're lazy. I have a distinct dislike for that word because I was so used to calling myself it or someone else calling you it.
And it's so interesting because if you're walking around with a cast on your leg and crutches,
exactly,
everybody would understand and they'd recognize that you weren't able to participate and that you'd be struggling, and even that you might have, a bit of depression related to your injury or whatever.
Yeah.
But if you can't see it, and also I think it's interesting with the hypermania or with the mania that you have,
yes,
you see pockets of that kind of happiness or energy or that excitement or that creativity. So that means in a way, us looking on, we don't really recognize how deep the mental health issues go because that's almost like a mask.
It is. And it's like, you can then call it moodiness. There's the romanticized image of the artist who's like, they're down like half the time, but boom, inspiration. And suddenly they'll take some heroin. Yeah. Like Sherlock Holmes is a great example. Even the TV show, right? He's miserable if he doesn't have a case. I'm like, dude, that guy's bipolar. Like,
yeah.
The thing about that, though, is the way bipolar works is it works in cycles. As my doc always says, what goes up must come down. So that's why the hypomania isn't actually always a positive thing, is because it's a sign of how you're going to crash, because you're kind of ping-ponging everywhere. So even though it can look good and it can look creative, it's also foreshadowing that you're going to crash afterwards, which always happens.
And that's what I saw in you at school.
The ups and downs.
Yeah. How did it feel to be identified by a teacher and to get that help? Did you feel embarrassed, ashamed? Did you wish I would go away? Or were you grateful that somebody recognized it and then were you willing to get the help?
That's a really good question. Both.
Right. Really good answer.
Yeah, because it's true. I think there was definitely elements of like, I just want to I don't need this help. I don't need this attention. I feel weak. I think a lot of that's linked to masculinity as well. Like you're a boy, you're a man. You're not meant to feel things. For God's sakes, or cry. God help you if you cry.
It's so interesting that you say that because I've just been watching a documentary with my year 12s called The Mask We Live In about men and masculinity and how that men are socialized to man up and be strong and don't cry and don't share your emotion. that can be very destructive. And that's why...
Especially if you're emotional.
Yeah, that's why the suicide rates for young men are so high, because women have more of an outlet than men tend to. That probably inhibited you a bit from being able to open up and accept what you were dealing with, perhaps.
Yeah, or find it shameful. I think shame was definitely in there. But then at the same time, you probably had one of the biggest effects of my entire life on me in the most positive way.
Oh, that's so nice.
I will never be able to convey how much it means, actually.
Isn't that lovely?
No, it's very true. You must then realize that you've probably done that for dozens of students throughout your time.
Probably hundreds of kids.
Hundreds,
I've been teaching. I'm moving into my 30th year teaching.
That's amazing.
And I've been in a pastoral counseling kind of role for 20 of them.
Like, don't get me wrong, I remember Bertolt Brecht and the Theater of the Absurd, and Artaud's cool because he was crazy and he just wanted to scream. But like the support you gave me, it's hard to quantify, but it almost matters more. Like, because this has changed my entire life. And in that way, I'm very grateful, because I don't know what would have happened if I never got the help that I needed. God forbid, I could have become suicidal in school. In fact, actually, I now remember I actually was suicidal in school, but I never followed through with anything. And I always had you to go back to, and you helped my parents understand as well, which made a difference. Even if they didn't always know what to do, they knew there was a problem.
Your parents, I remember I spoke a lot to your mum, and she was great. All she wanted to do was help and support.
She is so supportive.
And it's trying to understand and trying to help. But I think this is a lesson for any parents or teachers out there. If you get a sense that something's not right, ask. But you've got to ask in the right way. Like, you can't ask in front of their friends or when you're, walking past in the corridor. You've got to sit down and really give someone that attention and give them that space.
And don't give up. Like, if they might want to talk about it for the first day or the first week, or even because it's hard to talk about.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not a parent, but I imagine part of it is, they're a teenager. They have hormones going everywhere. Like, what counts as normal is, I think, part of the problem. Is without very clear education, that can be tough for any teacher or parent, is what signs do I actually look for? What isn't normal?
And I think what you have to understand is that any kind of mental health issue becomes a problem if it's debilitating for that person, or if it's meaning that they cannot cope with what life throws at them, which is exactly what you've been talking about. You couldn't cope with daily life.
You're very right. Actually, I stand corrected. It's not about what's not normal. Is it affecting your life?
Yes, because everybody worries. Everybody has down days. Everybody is self-critical and has negative self-talk. It's when it becomes obsessive or problematic, or when it really affects your daily functioning, that's when you need to get help. Tell me about then when you left university and you were diagnosed with bipolar. How did that come about? You said you hit rock bottom. So was that the worst time you'd experienced with your mental health?
I come from a relatively wealthy family. And that's a great thing, because I had a lot of support, but it also meant that I could basically get away with being unemployed for like 2 years. And so I flipped between odd jobs for a while. As soon as I left university, the plan was my parents have a family business. I was going to join the family business, or I was going to go work in consulting, one of the big consulting firms, then go back to family business. There's a whole plan that was made up. And I left university. I ripped my Achilles tendon conveniently right as I did. That wasn't self-inflicted. I was out of commission for like 8 months. And during those 8 months, I just sank into this like stupor of true pointlessness, because for the first time, there is no one telling me what to do. Not really. Like, there's no more path. There's no more school. There's no more university. And I think the full weight of just what the hell really, really sunk in. And so I tried out a few different odd jobs, and I was a professional poker player for like 2 years as well, which is where the mania actually helps. I'd play like 16 tables doing math at the same time at like some ridiculous like rate. Yeah, I was like, I could never do that anymore.
Were you successful?
Yeah, I did pretty well. The only reason I stopped because the United States government banned online poker, and that's where most of the players were. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was like playing video game for money.
Right.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, actually.
The mania helped because you were able to concentrate on
do
loads
stuff
of games.
Yeah, I mean, I could just do calculations at a speed that now on the medication that I take, I can't do, which is a small price to pay, to be honest, now that I've realized.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, I could just do things. We're talking like probabilistic game theory, like problem solving once a second or twice a second. Like, I just literally cannot do that anymore. And I look back and I'm like, Jesus, like, how did I do that?
Yeah. That's quite amazing.
Yeah.
But like you were saying earlier, that kind of bipolar mania really does stimulate a lot of success with people in creativity, performance, poker, whatever it may be.
Exactly.
Then how did you get your diagnosis? What was the turning point?
I think there was a girl involved, if I remember correctly. let me see. My mind is like actively not wanting to remember this.
Oh, that's interesting. Was she like, something's wrong with you need to get help?
No, she was my best friend. And I was convinced I was madly in love with her. I might have been. Who knows? I still write poetry about whether love exists.
I love it.
And I was deep into the unemployed self-loathing cycle at that point. Like I hadn't had a job in like a year and a half or something like that. And I was living away from home on my own with some people that I wasn't getting along with. So I was completely isolated from a support network, to be completely honest, faking it, everyone, and then rejected by her. And I had an episode. So I had like a manic depressive, just went off, lost my kind of, I didn't get hospitalized, but it's hard to explain. It's like I didn't do anything over the top. Around that period, I was drinking a lot. So I'd go out and I'd drink a lot. Like I'd go to Wanchai like every 2 days or something. Convince myself I was doing it to have fun. No, like I was doing it to cope in any way.
Self-medicate.
Exactly, self-medicate. And I became suicidal. I had an idea of what I was going to do. I was going to jump from a certain location. And then something kind of switch flipped in my head. Maybe it's like a survival instinct, which was literally like a voice just saying, go find a doctor. Like just go find one. I still thought that I was just depressed. So I was like, they'll give you something. Like, take whatever they give you. You are literally, your life is in danger now. Like, something did that. I went, and then while I was talking to the guy, I was going like 1,000,000 miles per hour. I was telling him all my symptoms. I was telling everything. I just Googled some random doctor online. And he told me that I was bipolar, which didn't make any sense at the time. And he gave me some pretty heavy-duty antipsychotics, which also kind of like calmed me down, knocked me out. But that was the beginning of an entire journey. Like, that wasn't like, I've now diagnosed you here, this fixes the problem. I've switched medication like 6 times since then. And only in the last 2 years would I say I've gotten a really good handle on my bipolar. So it was the beginning of this, but it was, kind of rock bottom, I think.
And that's another interesting
point. And I don't actually remember it super clearly either.
No, but that's
I literally find it difficult to remember.
Well, I think you've painted enough of a picture through that to tell us what you went through. And I think it's another really interesting point that you make. Is when you are diagnosed with the right thing, you don't necessarily get exactly the right medication straight away.
No.
And there are so many different types and combinations that doctors can try.
Yes.
And there are so many doctors. You might need to try different doctors until you find one that you really connect with. Yeah.
That's exactly what happened to me.
Right.
It was my second doctor that I met that actually helped.
Why did you change doctors without mentioning any names?
Actually, I think it was my parents. They're like, you should just get a second opinion.
Oh, okay. Yeah, which is very good advice.
Very good advice.
Yeah.
And the second guy was good, and he prescribed me different medication. And he just seemed more knowledgeable in general. Like, he could explain the whole thing to me better. And he did a lot more talk therapy than the first guy. This first psychiatrist was very much like, I'm just going to medicate the hell out of you.
And again, that can be typical of many psychiatrists, not all of them.
Yes.
You get your talk therapy with a psychologist, but you get your sort of diagnosis and medication with a psychiatrist typically. To find a psychiatrist that does talk therapy with you as well is an absolute bonus. And they're out there. There are some great psychiatrists out there that really do a bit of both, which is, I think, very important. And it'd be nice to see psychiatry move in that way more often.
And like the psychiatrist, he wasn't, like, sometimes when I think of talk therapy, I mean, this is a subject, I think people think of films. They think about, opening up about your parents or
lying on a couch.
Like, lying on a couch and tell what the dream means. I dreamt of something. What I found, it's not even about that. It's like arming myself with cognitive tools, like something like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Doing it with my doctor, how to change the way I think, these tools to change the way I think. And then using them outside of the clinical setting. These are like literally mental warfare tools and ways to think
so
differently.
Can you give me some examples of these tools that you might use?
So the most effective one outside of medication that I know, though you need both, very few people can do it with just one, is CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is essentially the idea of trying to change the way that you automatically think. So first of all, there's this idea of automatic thoughts. We all have automatic thoughts that are triggered by everything. What we see, hear, remember. We have these thoughts, and some of these thoughts for everyone are destructive or warped. And this is what insecurity basically is. Let's say you have social anxiety. You walk into a party, you think everyone's looking at you. For me, a big one was running. Like, I couldn't run outside because I was obsessed that everyone was staring at me, everyone was thinking about me, everyone thought I was fat. This is an automatic thought. I don't want to think this. Like, I'd love to just be like, I'm Brad Pitt. This is great. Like, look at my jiggling man boobs.
Yeah, but I'm just going to run like a beast.
Exactly. I'd love to do that. One of the things is automatic, though.
And that's interesting because that links in with the anorexia that you had.
Exactly.
So you've got the little connection.
That's where it is. That was definitely still the body image thing.
Mm-hmm.
How do you then change the way you think? Okay, so CBT, what I would say is There are different methods, but essentially it's this. First, you notice the thought. In order to notice it, you probably have to write it down. And you've got to just get good at knowing yourself and knowing your thoughts. Then you've got to be able to rationally question that thought. Now, again, you have to do all this in slow motion in advance. You got to do it with a professional. You got to write it down because you just can't do it in the moment. You're too emotional. And so you write it down, you write out the thought, and you ask yourself, is this logical? Is this actually plausible? Are there any cognitive flaws or logical flaws? So for example, let's say I take that one. Like, people aren't thinking about me that much. Not as much as I may be afraid of and would like. Like, people don't. They think about themselves. I don't even know if they're looking at me in the first place. Even if they did, their thoughts have no effect on me whatsoever, et cetera, et cetera. So my information is flawed. Like, I'm making a conclusion that is not accurate. So then you rewrite the thought and you replace it with something else that's more positive or that is more reasonable. I think generally reasonable beats positive, because positive is just like everything's great, but that doesn't hold up that well all the time. But instead,
especially if you're quite a negative.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, everything is not great,
guts.
guys. Yeah. And this is one of the things where just telling people to think positive isn't going to work, because they're like, things are not positive.
That's really interesting. So finding a reasonable thought, something that you can sit in and that you're happy with.
Exactly. And once you do this all in slow motion in a clinical setting, the trick is to then change it into a habit. And that takes practice. So you might do it on your own, but you have to start thinking it. But it's amazing because it works. Like, I actually do it with my friends now, with people that I know that have mental health issues. I do CBT with them and I help them do it. And it's amazing how a person who is essentially really terrified, really neurotic, really convinced of something. I have a friend who works as probably shouldn't name what career he's in, but he's in the medical field. And he is perpetually terrified of being fired. And he's convinced every time he makes a mistake that his boss notices that everything's in trouble. If they're angry at him, he thinks he's going to be fired. And I've sat him through these things and been like, well, they're probably going to get irritated at your performance, but you don't know the reasons they're irritated. You know almost nothing about them. There could be, X, Y, Z variable in their lives, to replace it then with that reasonable thought. And they will calm down on the spot. Like, you will feel calmer.
Your reasonable thought with the I can't go out running because everyone's going to look at me and think I'm fat is I can go out running because nobody actually really cares that much.
Exactly.
And they're
no one cares.
thinking
No one's
about
watching
themselves. And even if they're looking at me, I don't know what they're thinking.
Exactly. I don't know what they're thinking, because mind reading is probably one of the biggest general flaws. I don't know what they're thinking is probably the most important one. Like, you don't know what someone else is thinking. Because I think it's not as easy to say, don't care about what people think, because we're social creatures. We're kind of built into us. But you don't know what they're thinking.
Have you experienced social anxiety?
I've always been a pretty good I'm decent in social situations. So I'd be scared, but it's just like another fear mixed in with so many others that I don't know. Like, I was just scared. The thing that freaks me out the most nowadays is performing. I still freak out every single time, but less so. That's not even a social situation anymore, though. That's like you're going on stage to, get naked, metaphorically.
Yeah, and you are. But why do you put yourself through that if you
I literally ask myself that every time.
If you get super, super nervous. Is it because of the rush and the high afterwards?
I was nervous on my way here.
Oh, were you?
And I did CBT. Yeah, I was on my way here and I was nervous. I was like, well, what if I make a fool of myself? What if I say something I shouldn't? What if my poetry is terrible and I read it on air and blah, blah, blah. And I was replacing it with things like, this is a really positive experience.
Yes.
Like, this is something new.
And some people will love your poetry and some may not. And that's fine,
exactly.
And what's really amazing is how open you're being about mental health issues, which is super important.
Yeah.
Because there's such a stigma associated with mental health. And can you talk to me a bit about why you think that is and how can we change that?
I've thought about this a lot because it's very, very tricky. And I think part of it is that there's this term neurotypical. I'm just going to use it for if people don't have a mental health problem. So for a neurotypical person, there are things they take for granted. They take for granted the fact that they have generally got control over their moods and mind. If you have control over your moods and mind and your thoughts for the most part, or at least your thoughts don't affect your mood or your productivity in a great way, then you live under this assumption that if you don't feel that way, it's your fault. And you can think your way out of it. And if you haven't experienced having that taken away from you or having yourself imbalanced to the point, like the only experience most people have with that is alcohol or casual drug use. I always tell people that no one who is drunk would suddenly say that they're functional and should go to work. But it's just a different flavor of the same issue, which is a chemical affecting your brain. And until people really grasp that, it's not your fault. Your chemistry can change things. That would go a long way. If someone, like you said, is physically injured, people can identify with it, even if you've never been injured like that. If someone can't walk, you can easily imagine instantaneously what they can't do, what is difficult for them, right? Even if someone has chronic pain and they tell you, you can be like, pain. I get physical pain, right? So that's a big part of it. I think is taking for granted having that kind of control. But another element of it is sort of a lack of understanding, and this is an educational aspect of this feedback process in our mind, which is that the part that people understand is our thoughts produce our emotions. This is a true thing. That's why CBT works. If I think of something that makes me feel scared, I'm going to feel scared. Everyone understands that. So they tell you control your thoughts, think positively, da-da-da. But the other problem is that your emotions control your thoughts. If you're suddenly scared, you will think scary things and you will see the world in a different way. And at some point, that cycle can spiral and you have someone who's got a mood disorder at the time. And if people understood both those elements and they understood that, look, your thoughts are also being produced by your feelings, then they won't always tackle it from the thought side. They'll tackle it from the feeling side of things and be like, okay, so you're just scared right now. It doesn't matter why. You're going to think scary stuff. Like, can we change that medically? Can we take you out of a stressful situation and just put you somewhere else? Can you take a mental health day? Not because you're thinking anything, you need to be in a different spot.
That just then leads us to the point of seek help if you need it. There's help available out there. There are helplines, there are GPs, there are psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, well-being programs, mindfulness programs. There are apps. There are books. If you don't have money, you can access books. There are so many things that you can do.
The problem is that once you're in that point, you don't want to do anything.
Yes.
That's the problem.
That's such an amazing point, because many of the kids that I deal with that have mental health issues feel like they don't deserve the help and they don't want the help.
I always tell people that step one of getting better is you have to want to get better. It's not necessarily an easy step to take. You've got to actually believe I can get better and I care. And sometimes it's arbitrary because you don't want to get better. So you have to make a conscious decision. I'm going to get better. And I will rationally believe that on the other side of this is a better person.
Yeah, and that's what you're proving by when you hit rock bottom and some little voice said to you, go and get help, and you're not always going to feel like this.
Exactly. You're not always going to feel like this. Yeah.
And now you're in the happiest space you've been in your life.
I am the happiest I've ever been in my entire life. And I feel like I have a new lease on life. Like,
isn't that amazing?
It is unbelievable.
So how has your life changed in the last 2 years?
I started wanting to do things. So I started writing a lot of stuff that wasn't incredibly miserable, first of all.
Well done.
Yeah, which is like, whoa. Turns out people like laughter. I was able to hold down several relationships, not at the same time.
I've got an episode on open relationships.
I tried that. Didn't work. So I was able to hold down a relationship, and now I have a very positive one that I've learned a lot from my previous ones, and it's working out very well. I'm now employed in a job that I generally like, and I'm just spending my days doing what I want to accomplish what I want, which is often writing related. Last year, when I was turning 30, I decided I'd write 3 books in 3 months as first drafts. And I'd never have been able to do that if I wasn't where I am today, if I'm not in this positive space. And I think most importantly for me, I feel is I can help other people that even if they're just my friends, until you help yourself, you can't help other people. You can't support people as well. And that in of itself is enough. And yeah, there is some upsides to mental illness in a weird way. And one of them is, I think on a good day, you can appreciate simple things. Like I remember taking a walk along the ferry pier and just seeing the sky clear and seeing the tourists and just having these moments of like, nothing is wrong right now. I feel okay, which is awesome. That in of itself can just be awesome.
I think that is so interesting, that appreciating the little things in life and taking time to stop and smell the roses is really, really important. And I think that you are a role model in so many ways because you're male, you're young, you're opening up about your mental health issues, you're talking about how desperate and hard it was, and you're talking about the ways that you cope and manage. And that's going to inspire lots of people out there. And you know what? If we can inspire one young man who's struggling to go and get support or help, and I'll put some links to different things in the show notes that people can do to get support, then that's just amazing. And this conversation is so, so important.
I hope so.
Well, we kind of touched on this, but what impact has it had having celebrities come out as bipolar? Does that give you confidence to talk about it? Does it help to have a tribe or other people you can identify with?
Yes. I think feeling alone is one of the most common experiences of mental illness is you think it's you. You think there's no one like you around you because they can't help you. So that goes away. It's still problematic. I used to really dislike Kanye West. And then I saw something he did and he talked about being bipolar. And I'm like, this just explains everything. Like the guy is having manic phases. Everyone else is laughing at him, but I feel bad for the guy that he's not being treated properly. And
so
then
you can empathize with him in a different way now that you know he's bipolar.
I see it in a completely different way. Robin Williams' death hit me really hard, like really hard.
Why?
He was one of my kind of heroes. You know, he's a comedian. He's always positive. He was in a bunch of my favorite movies, even the ones that aren't very good, like Hook, which is one of the best movies ever made.
Could you relate to him because of his mania? Because you have a similar style.
Absolutely.
In your dark humor and your mania.
A little bit, yeah. When he could really go over the top and just like own a room and just go on and on, first thing that comes to his head. Absolutely. And I sometimes feel like when someone like that passes away, it's as if we've lost someone in our tribe. And it's like the mental illness won, because to me, that's what happens when someone kills themselves. It's not that they gave up. It's that the mental illness beat them. Like, it was lethal. It was a death sentence at that point. But at the same time, whenever a celebrity comes out and says it, you feel like there's one more person that gets it, that's there. And I hopefully takes one step forward to being normalized or accepted more by everyone else.
I think it makes a big, big impact. You know, it really does. It gets, you know, Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade and Robin Williams, they're all getting people talking about mental health issues. And it's so sad to have lost them all, but they have opened the door for these conversations that haven't been had, you know, and it's been swept under the rug.
It is. Yeah.
You know, let's not really talk about it because it's too scary and we don't want to mention the word suicide because it shouldn't be talked about. But that's not how it should be.
Whereas if you struggle with suicide, it should be talked about. It should be up front and center. I think the next step would be for a lot of these role models to then share how we can beat this thing. Like, how can we all work together to actually make it a better place? Like, you know, have a celebrity come out and be like, we should have a mental health day. People should take a mental health day. People should be able to find the help that they need. I think we're still at the stage where a lot of people are coming out, but it's hard enough for them that they can't necessarily lead. But it would be good to have some leadership as well and have people try to really change things.
Mental health should be able to be covered by insurance and stuff like that. I mean, maybe there are some very expensive insurance plans where you can get mental health cover, but most don't cover it. And things like that makes it so much more difficult.
Yeah.
And it would be great for people who don't have money if there were government-funded mental health support.
Government system in Hong Kong is not very good from everything that I've heard and read about.
I have some experience in it with kids and I've seen some good stuff. I think it's not dire and I do think they're trying to work to improve it. At least we have some government mental health things for young people or for adults as well. But there's a lot of work that still can be done on a global scale. You know, there really is. You write about mental health issues in your poetry. What sort of stuff do you write about? And in a minute, you're going to read us a couple of poems, which is going to be great.
Weird. I don't know how to explain it.
What do you mean? You don't know how to explain the topics?
You asked me earlier, like, why do you go on stage and what do you do? Well, first is no one can interrupt me. You don't, by the way. That's what's awesome. You don't interrupt me. But also, like, I don't know how to say certain things except by doing something like that. So I try to sometimes say something positive because I think you need to be positive to really deal with mental illness as someone who has it. And I try to tell people that they're not alone. But I don't know, man. Like, I don't know. I write dick jokes too.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say, do you have some humor in it as well? Like, can you laugh at it sometimes or is it all very sort of dark?
No, it's not all very dark. There's definitely some dark pieces, but there's only so much dark you can hear and sometimes it doesn't help.
Is it about raising awareness, helping others and catharsis?
I got to be honest, like, I wish I had more specific motives like that, but a lot of the times I write poems, it is one of these sort of hypomanic moments. I'll write it all in one go and I'll have an idea and I'll just kind of scribble it all down in one go. So catharsis in the sense that like I feel possessed, like I have to do it. It's like an itch, like I got to do it.
Brilliant. I love that.
I have no choice.
That just shows amazing creative passion.
Yeah, hopefully. I don't know.
So
maybe if I read it, you judge.
I will. I'm really excited. So if you could read us a couple of your poems.
Try not to freak out either. Okay.
Don't be nervous.
All right, this one is called Werewolves. In high school, I rarely manifested as a werewolf except inside the toilet and when trying to talk to girls. My werewolfness actually helped sometimes. Boy, those bullies ran when I howled at them, or grew enough white hair that I could bypass the age restrictions on roller coasters. Still, if I could get away with it, I'd get a sick note from Mom. I'd paw her with my long claws early in the morning. Hey, Mom, I'm a werewolf today. Write me a note. Okay, could you cut your nails? Couldn't. They were claws. Couldn't go out when the moon was full. Kids didn't like my long, loping stride or the way I howled at the moon way past the point when everyone else was passed out. Calm down, they'd say. Couldn't stay as a man or wolf or werewolf. It drove the girls crazy. I wanted to hunt them sometimes, wanted to run with them otherwise. In a pack, as a wolf and as a man, was mostly embarrassed. Never stayed the same shape. Got on great with ghosts, ghouls, wizards, hated vampires because they always got what they wanted. Had a touch, a dominating glance. They always managed to get invited in, practiced routines till it worked, whilst I chained myself outside just in case. After high school, I went to Europe for university because I saw on the corner of a campus brochure the green peaks of a real forest. Figured that would be perfect. It got worse and better. There were other shapeshifters, trolls. I'd already met those online, and nymphs. Few werefolk, though. Couldn't get close to a nymph without going blind, though at least I could regenerate my eyes when I changed form, so they didn't have to cover up so much around me. Thought nymphs were perfect for me and me for them, and I was. I was the perfect friend. Getting friend-zoned usually triggered a change, so I tried to stay away from nymphs after that. I got bitter. Tried to find the others in London, but it turned out the song lied. No longer leashed, I would roam the cobble streets at all hours, but during lectures it was hard to hold a pen in these shaggy hands. I met a lot of people that had bad teeth, silver fillings, would bite me with their words, drew blood. The blood faded when I changed, invisible except for the memory of the hurt. That remained. You're invincible, they'd say. So lucky to be a werewolf. Most of us can't change. And they were right about how it didn't seem like I was vulnerable. Number one cause of death of werewolves are werewolves. After university, I was screwed. No werewolf could fit in a suit. I had to get 3, one for man, wolf, werewolf, and still I could turn on a dime. When someone's mouth became a crescent moon, the werewolf would come out and ruin another jacket. That got expensive. They blamed me for it. They always did, just like the non-ghosts who accuse ghosts of being transparent and ephemeral on purpose. That walking through walls and howls were the same, were just cries for attention. They never blamed the moon or the blood I never chose. Even my family got tired when I changed mid-dinner, break another plate, and sometimes the chair. You can only own so much IKEA furniture. What did we do this time, they'd ask. Tried to tell them it wasn't them, it was the moon. I just changed. Learn to control it, they'd say. We can. It was a revelation. So wait, you're all werefolk too? They'd say they felt like wolves, that they thought of howling at the moon too, and then they'd do a poor impersonation of me. Frankly, it was kind of insulting. They never grew claws, never ripped apart objects, never tore apart relationships, get fired, get chained to their beds. How could they say they know what it's like to be a werewolf? How could they say they knew what it was like to be me? How could they say I'm not strong enough to control it, that they were better than me? How could they claim to even be werewolves when they never transformed into one? It made no goddamn sense. Well, that's because we can control ourselves, honey. You should too. Cheer up. Go outside more. Get your mind off things. Look on the bright side. Ignore the moods. I mean the moon. Ignore the moon. Calm down. Stop turning into a werewolf. Stop it. It's impolite. It's awkward. Of course she didn't love you. Of course you failed. You turned into a werewolf. Just stop being you. The number one cause of death of werewolves are werewolves. There aren't that many of us. Most people only meet a few in their lifetimes, or an occasional vampire to whom they recommend suntan lotion. Ghosts who ought to stop talking to and hearing other ghosts because ghosts aren't real, despite the overwhelming scientific evidence that ghosts are real. But most people don't understand ectoplasmic chemistry or have even heard of ectoplasmic chemistry. They just see Frankenstein monsters that need to learn to be human and not all the myriad, beautiful, frustrated, terrible creations that look like people, but are like themselves. They don't like them. They are scary and distracting and out of fashion. Sure, the laws have changed. You can't burn them at the stakes anymore, so they'll burn themselves, burn off their hands, their claws, tear off their skin, try to undo the costume everyone says they wear to find the human inside. They never blame the moon. They claim to know the silver bullet, and they shoot werewolves with it. It's a good thing, therefore, that werewolves don't exist. Just gays, obsessive-compulsive, schizophrenics, bipolars, lesbians, and the chronically depressed.
That's amazing. That's so powerful.
Thank you.
What a metaphor for your life.
A little bit, I have to admit, a little bit difficult to read sitting down. Much more
you
like
like
that.
You like to standing up. You could have stood up to read it, but you read it really well. That was brilliant.
Okay, all right.
I found that really poignant, very funny, and really, really captivating. Like I was really, really captivated, and I was trying to see the nuances of the metaphor for mental health and also the story of your life in there. And it was really brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, really, really brilliant. Did you just do that all in one hit, or did that take a while to write?
Mostly in one, but then edited it over time.
Right,
so,
okay.
mostly most first draft and then kind of edited.
Wow, it's amazing.
Oh, thank you.
It's really amazing. I love it. That would be an amazing performance art piece.
It's really fun to do as performance.
Yeah. It would be amazing.
I do like to do it.
And have you got one more that you can read for us?
This is nothing to do with mental health, but it captures Hong Kong piece. It's called Boarding at Admiralty. It's a love poem. Okay. It's an erotic love poem.
Brilliant.
I lean into your space. like the backpack of a guilo on the yellow line, like he's in the jungle obsessed with snakes, his Berghaus backpack and malaria tablets necessary, according to his mom in the States. Your head turns sideways, sways, like the cable car at Ocean Park. My heart starts to, I'm falling, I'm afraid of falling into you. I want an all-year pass, a birthday discount. This is new with the new territories for an island guy, looking at that lime green NTR line. I want to take you and make you wet as the raging river ride. Then our lips meet, like expat wankers and overpriced sighing bun cafes. I was nervous. You tasted like late-night siumai drowned in the spice. The sauce of my fantasies occlude this moment. My wooden hawker stick sticky and sharp. I avoid pressing into your hips. We are commuters on the train of love. The first step, I must not be inappropriate. Keep my distance. Even if you are a busker singing my praises, I must not clap. I play it cool, like I'm watching the moment by recording it on my phone. E. The new octopus reloading machines are as foreign, unexpected, and clumsy as me trying to undo your bra. Like playing games on the MTR, thumbs of frenzy, your room dark as an under-Soko arcade in Causeway Bay. Like I'm trying to pull off a Shoryuken, quick Z arcade stick flick movement, but all I do is dash too far ahead, open myself up to a combo of, do you need help with that? But my power bar is fully charged, and with a super Hadoken flick, reveal your glistening mounds, a marvelous meeting of the IFC and ICC towers. My hands are a light show, because it's 8 o'clock, as they flash over your soft as durian bamboo box hot hawkhouse, revealing nipples pink as the shrimp I devour, like a softie by the ferry pier, though on my Gap jeans I'm hard, my hawker stick like concrete, like the Bank of China. I want to get your number, want to call you to ask for a personal loan to loan back my heart, but I'm afraid you'll ask for low interest rates. These days, everybody wants low interest rates. My hands climb your white chashu bao bread, my Chung Chao bun festival in private. Though the truth is, I've barely left the island. Your skin is like Peng Chao to a local. Your Tinder trend expat boyfriends are more adventurous, whereas I could tell you what to order at Choi Wa. Order me around. Son, I'm putting my fingers into your red packet. So excited. Let's see if my lycee is over 500. But you moan like hundreds, 100% you like it. I'm crooking my finger like an OG pot-bellied local guy picks his exposed belly button. Get in there! Like I've got massive reach with my uncut pinky nail. Your eyes flash amber. Then your cheeks went red. Now you're gushing foul language, black rainstorm with your hips. Stay at home, no school, all day in bed. You are my Panadol, Actifast, porcelain wider than an obsessive Fankel fan. You tell me to slow down, stop going minibus speed. Less is more. Before, you scream, fuck, whilst my minibus careens. But wait, you don't want to board yet. You suck on my fingers. We share our soy milk together. Soon, I will enter your western tunnel. Begin by paying the high toll for a classy Soho dinner. Of course I got unlucky, but next time the date will be better. I will win this Mark 6 by calling your number. You're my new boss. I stay till you want to leave. I stay for no pay, give you my face, but you turn away. You are in control. Will only take me to Kowloon, not my home. I will pay $10 more if I can call you to come. You are willing. We are in the mood. This is magical. A star ferry ride across your Victorian harbor. You are deep as that. I want to reclaim your white lands, kiss your chicken feet with my black bean. The paradox comes, rush hour but so slow. We are pressed like 6:30 Admiralty, so close. I'm pushing towards your door. You are holding the sign that says, don't board, wait for the next train. So we wait and play on vibrating phones. Then the door arrives. The train is arriving. Please, please stand back. I'm about to be filled. You asked me to move into the center of the train. I move deeper and away, standing. Beast with two backs. Please stand back from the door. Stand back from the door. Toot, 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 toot. My blue line is ended. I have changed at your station. But now you call out the brown line?
Wow, that's amazing.
It's very classy.
I loved it. That's hilarious.
This is what your student has become.
I'm so proud. That's brilliant. That was like a sexy Hong Kong metaphor for lust and love and Hong Kong all piled into one. I don't know if anyone outside of Hong Kong will get it, but people listening from Hong Kong will love it. They will love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. That, like, super vulnerable to share your work and share your writing and your thoughts and your inner self, and also share your story about your mental health journey. I'm very proud of you, Vishal. So proud of you.
In fact, I would like to do one last thing if we have time.
Yeah.
Which is something I wasn't going to do, but I want to do it now.
Yeah.
Is I want to read a poem that I'm writing about you.
Oh, my God. Okay.
All right.
Brilliant. I'm ready. Oh my God, that last one was hilarious. So clever. Man, that's so clever.
This is still a bit of a draft, but I feel like if I won't be able to read it on your podcast again, so I'm going to read it on your podcast and hopefully be able to read my own handwriting.
Okay, cool.
As I do it. It is called Hannah Ford. I did not know it was wrong to be scared, so I did not speak, and silence breeds normality. Weakness was the word I branded onto every tear and every fear, because tears are not for men. Silence was strength, impervious, attractive. To ask for help was to depend on someone else, which was something worse. Then once she'd noticed I'd gone to the bathroom, notice how men don't cry in bathrooms and movies. I do not like remembering what I was like when I was 25, untreated, or misdiagnosed. I remember a daily invisible struggle and fear for years and years and years. Constant, every day, first thing in the morning, I was afraid. A peaceful day was like rest, salvation. I remember sobbing on a staircase. I stopped eating. I hunched back every day to school, terror what a teacher said, but I was smart at least. Ms. Hannaford was the first person to ever notice my silence. These signs, these quiet signs of internal violence. The truth is, some people are born too sensitive. They absorb life like a sponge, and darkness is a hard stain to remove. She found me a counselor, then a psychiatrist, a psychologist, from comfort to venting to advice to CBT to pills. I was always wounded, but the diagnosis didn't come till later. Bipolar, not till I was 25. I don't like remembering those days. Even the worst ones today don't compare. Now I know how to fight, to war, but before, torture. That used to be my definition of life, a lifelong prison sentence. And they don't get it. Smart, from a wealthy family, witty. But our minds are our realities. And a skull mute screams. I didn't dream, didn't pray, didn't believe someday that things could get better, although today you taught me to speak. And now I write occasionally bad poetry. Hope has become my watchword. I know it in my bones. Seen grown men floored, lives lost. I know courage is not the absence of fear. Miss Hannaford, you freed me to care. First about myself, then others. Bought me books to inspire. Talked me out of silence. Listened. Motherly, even my own mother couldn't understand. I now believe my life has purpose. Maybe I don't always measure up to it, but in a word, my purpose is to heal. And maybe not just myself. She taught me what steadfast looked like. Sat with me whilst I cried. One of the reasons I'm still alive. Taught me how it wasn't me that held the knife.
Oh, Vishal. Oh my God, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. Oh my God, I feel a little emotional. I'm getting tearful.
It's true.
That's
you make
so
a big
lovely.
difference. You make a great difference.
Oh my God, now I'm going to cry.
It's true. I think
I've never cried on my own podcast.
Oh, points! I finally scored. I mean, because I feel like you probably don't know. Like, you do what you do, and what you do is amazing, but you probably don't know what an effect you might have on some people's lives and how positive it is. You could have been an investment banker and just messed everything up. You didn't do that. Good job.
Wow, that was really, really beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's amazing.
I'll send you a proper written copy as well.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. Thank you for taking the time to write that. That's amazing. I can't believe you made me cry.
Hey, we're even.
Yeah.
You see, you saw me a lot, and now it's evened out.
Oh, that was amazing. Thank you. I feel really, really moved. Yeah, that's really beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And you know what? I absolutely love my job, and I feel so privileged to be able to help kids.
I mean, your passion is obvious. Like, it's something.
And I've helped hundreds of kids over the years. I really have.
If I believed in heaven, I'd say you've got a good chance.
Yeah, I don't believe in heaven either.
Damn, right? Like, karma, you get to be a butterfly.
Yeah, maybe karma.
Okay, karma, all right.
Oh, that's awesome. Vishal, thank you so much for sharing all that with me. That's amazing. Now I need to blow my nose and I haven't got tissue, but never mind. Tell me, what would you say to anybody who's struggling with their mental health?
I'd say the first step is to believe that you can get better. No matter how dark or how crappy things are, don't give up, and you can actually get better. And also that you're not alone. There's loads of people, even if they're not in the same room as you right now, who are literally feeling what you're feeling right now, even if it's on the other side of the world. But honestly, I would just reduce it to don't give up. Never, ever give up.
Beautiful. What great words to finish this podcast on. I can hear I'm all teary. Thank you so much for opening up. It takes a lot of courage, I think, to do that, but I can see that you want to make a difference for other people out there. This is an amazing podcast, which is going to have a huge impact on many, many people. I'm so, so proud of you. You're an absolute inspiration. You're amazingly talented. And look, just thank you so much. And for my listeners out there, if there's anybody who you know who would benefit from hearing Vishal talk about his mental health journey or even hearing those amazing poems, please share this podcast with them. And for anybody out there who is struggling, do know that tomorrow is a better day, and please just reach out for help.
Reach out.
And there'll be some helpline information in the podcast notes. And thank you very much,
Thanks
Vishal.
for giving me
It's
this
been
platform.
amazing.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been incredible. I'm super, super proud of you. And now I need to go and blow my nose. Thanks for the poem. It's meant so much to me. You've made my day.
Good.
Hi, Confidants. I want to tell you about my Patreon page. I've joined Patreon in the hope of getting sponsorship for my Hong Kong Confidential podcast. Patreon is a great way for my listeners to get on board and sponsor me with monthly payments, and that goes towards my production costs and rewards for my members. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page, please go to patreon.com and search up Jules Hannaford or Hong Kong Confidential. I would really appreciate you visiting my page. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.